My name is Nick. I have a question probably for Scott, but prompted by some remarks from Jacob. So Jacob, you described some fairly disturbing examples of intimidation, some of the things that were going on. Scott, you work within the system, right? You work within the parliamentary system to try to make change happen, and everyone here really enjoys the sight of you torturing unfortunate bureaucrats in Senate estimates.
I never torture folks.
Yeah. My question, I guess, is how effective are the existing oversight mechanisms when the type of example that Jacob described there is quite clearly illegal under current law? Forget about changes to future law.
They are better than some parts of the world, and I don't want to...
Well, you said you probably...
I never really quite know how to take this. One of the deputies of the Rwandan Greens was in Australia 4 or 5 years ago. He'd been living in exile in Sweden for a couple of years because the president of the Green Party in Rwanda had been found by the side of the road decapitated. So we're not there, all right? But you see what happened to the Swan Island demonstrators who were busted, maybe even some of the people in this room, black bagged, stripped naked, threatened with torture, threatened with all kinds of abuse. And I think in Australia it's kind of a fine line. We are somewhere on that spectrum between being able to actually mostly, for the most part, gather safely in this room and conspire to create more democratic space. But also people, campaigners here working on all kinds of levels are being treated hideously. The oversight regimes really aren't there. You've got Queensland, quite senior Queensland political figures calling coal demonstrators terrorists. That word needs to be used extremely carefully in any jurisdiction, extremely carefully. And he wasn't fooling around, he wasn't being ironic. Terrorists. Martin Ferguson proposed that the then Attorney General set ASIO onto coal demonstrators because they were threatening the profits of people he figured he might be working with in a few months' time. That serious, which they did. So no, the oversight mechanisms really are not there. The framing of what constitutes terrorist action is way too broad. The way that these powers are applied, and it's not, ASIO cop a lot of flack because they're kind of at that top, the apex of the pyramid. A lot of the really, really creepy, abusive stuff is done in state jurisdictions by state, state police units who are charged with, keeping the peace and tracking demonstrators and stuff. It's right through the system, which means the oversight regime is really uneven depending on which state or territory you're operating in. But I'm not, the Rwandan example was, I guess, maybe a little bit full on, but we do have power here to push back. Star Force locked a bunch of demonstrators in the shipping container at the Beverley demonstration and filled that container, including children, and filled that container with tear gas. Oh. And it took 10 or 12 years for that to work its way through the courts. And they prosecuted the shit out of them, and they were found, I don't know exactly what the charges were, but they were found to have acted unlawfully, and they won quite a big compensation payout. We do have agency, but for every example like that, where those people were persistent enough to pursue their rights, you get examples like the occupiers, people who were followed, including into their homes, and who the hell are they going to complain to? So no, we've got a lot of work to do in this country. I worry a little bit that we are kind of complacent because, white, privileged, not working on really terrifying stuff. Nobody's ever kicked my door in at 3 in the morning. And so the experience of most Australians is, look, I'm not doing anything wrong. Let's just give the cops what they want. They're trying to solve crime. Every single interview I've done today. It's like, why shouldn't the cops say they need these powers? Why shouldn't we give them to them? We're way too trusting and not as anti-authoritarian as we probably think is in our national character.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing to that, just to reinforce what Scott said? I was supposed to be on Swan Island that day, so I know those protesters very closely, and that was horrific. But just to show you the waste of resource and the attempt to harangue and undermine the mental stability of activists, I took a Sovereign Bastards Lunix cartoon of sovereign operations border cartoon, the one with the Australian flag and the razor wire. I took one of those to Bill Shorten's office to thank him and the ALP for continuing to be sovereign bastards because their refugee policy is hardly any better. So after I left that office, I chalked on the footpath outside his office, "Free the refugees, shame on you, Bill." I walked back to a car park. 2 AFP officers appeared in the car park, took my driver's licence, asked me if I was carrying chalk. No, it gets better. It's well worth the minute to tell the story. Insanity. Our camera person, we always take a person to film our actions. Our camera person was stripped, shoes off, backpack off, down to just his t-shirt and jeans, socks off, everything. Then they were taking a long time to come back with my driver's licence. Then a paddy wagon showed up with 4 Victorian police for 3 people with chalk. And no, listen to this waste of resource. I ended up in a car park in Moonee Ponds, which is a really sort of middle-class suburb in Melbourne, so next to a Coles, surrounded by 8 AFP officers, insisting on searching my car for additional chalk. Nothing else to say.
Good on you. Okay.
Well, this question is on that theme. It was directed to the Senator. Despite these things, Bill Shorten is needed with his senators in the Senate to prevent the passing of metadata laws. How can we, as citizens, push his buttons? What are his buttons to push to ensure that it's not passed?
It's kind of a good question. I've given up trying to judge the psychology of the Labor Party, and there's folks in the room doing this work for much longer than me who might be able to help knock that out. I don't know what makes the guy tick. I unfortunately think it's likely to come down to purely political calculation. There'll be a pain threshold in there somewhere. We're standing next to George Brandis, and having his senators sit next to George Brandis to crush us through in the vote would be politically more costly than finding some way out of it, and either pushing for a delay or amending it to the point where it's useless, sending it back to the House of Representatives. It's like a 2-day mandatory data retention regime that is all warranted and this and that. They could amend it and fix it up, or they could vote no, and that is largely a political calculation. They're not sitting there nutting out the policy. They're going, is he going to beat us up and call another press conference with Andrew Coleman? So what I think we need to do actually is sign all the petitions, but actually mostly just get on the phone. Get on the phone to the MP's offices, Shorten's office. I think we should maybe move beyond the senators because it's going to be decided in Mr. Shorten's office. Ring them. Go and visit. Don't underestimate the power of actually showing up at a Polly's office and waiting to be seen and not leaving until you have to take chalk. If you want to talk to the police about metadata and even create some metadata, take some chalk with you. And just really spread the word. I know this sounds kind of old-fashioned, so yeah, Facebook it and get stuff out there online, but just really old-fashioned organising. We won these things before. We don't quite have a mandatory internet filter in this country because people just said, fuck it, I'm not going to wait for somebody to write the grand campaign manifesto and direct everything. I'm just going to do a bunch of really creative, crazy stuff and put it out there. So it could be anything from quite literally a 4-minute phone call to an electorate officer who probably will agree with you. You're probably going to be talking to a staffer who actually agrees with you and thinks what the Labor Party is doing is insane. Yes. So you'll be talking to people all the way through the system, bureaucrats and political staffers who agree. Just pick the phone up. Can everybody just do that? It would actually make a really big difference.
Can I just add, I'm from Melbourne. Last November, and I work for Victorian Trades Hall, okay, put that out there. Last November we had a landslide victory to the ALP in the state government. Just last weekend, seats are still in doubt, but I don't think anyone can refute that we totally fucked Campbell Newman in Queensland. Now, a big part of that is, yes, we should, as well as getting on to Bill Shorten's office and other Labor Party Polly's offices, and fuck, even some of the smaller Liberal Party people, such as them that still exist. All right, Bill Shorten was put where he is by the union movement. All right, he was secretary, then president of the AWU, and the election results in Victoria have shown that, more than the Labor Party winning, what it has shown and what is that the union movement still has power electorally, which we forgot for too many bloody years. All right, now you've got an election coming up in next month in New South Wales. When the federal election comes, most of you, I assume, those of you, and with all respect, those of you who haven't retired yet, you'll be working, I'm just assuming, if you're at politics in the pub, or members of your appropriate trade union. If you're not, go out and join. Lobby your union officials. Tell them, pass at their conferences, raise workplace petitions inside the unions to say to Bill Shorten, you're coming to us for money at election time, all right, just like we did to Daniel Andrews down in Victoria. Yes, we will support you, we will do this, 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 this and this. We are going to expect that you are going to get rid of the move-on laws. We are going to expect that you are going to solve the fireys dispute, the AMBO's dispute, the teachers dispute. Because if we do this for you, and you don't give us some payback, we're not going to fucking do it again. We've been fooled enough times by the ALP. Get into your union movement, force your union leadership to take a strong message to the ALP that we will only support them if they can guarantee that they will overturn these issues, that they will not vote for the retention of metadata, that they will not continue to treat refugees like criminals, a whole range of issues. Force them to make the pledge.
I'm here from the Australian Youth Climate Coalition tonight, and I was just wondering what Adani's rights are with the Carmichael Mining Galilee Basin project if it doesn't go forward under the new government in Queensland. Are they able to seek compensation from the country and pretty much take away our rights as people?
That's a really good question. Look, they can attempt to. I mean, you know, we already have the plain packaging tobacco case going ahead, and part of that process was Philip Morris, relocating to Hong Kong so they could use the bilateral agreement to do that. Whether a company under the current mining laws can do that, I'm not 100% sure, but I know there have been rumblings about that. And there are other examples of this going on around the world. And I just, in response so that you see how broadly it's already being implemented, I just want to tell you a few examples. So Philip Morris is obviously, the tobacco one's pretty clear. Lone Pine is an energy mining company in Canada, and they're suing the Canadian government for banning shale gas exploration. Again, also we have the Pacific Rim Mining Company, which is associated with Australia, El Salvador, the list goes on and on and on. Veolia, which is a French company that deals with water and waste management, it's quite big in New South Wales. They're currently suing the Egyptian government over worker rights. So there are many blueprints being laid that set the judicial precedent for compensation, yeah? But it won't matter under the TPP, because under the TPP, it goes into a secret tribunal with lay, what do you call them, adjudicators, that are mining lobbyists the one day, and then they're on the arbitration the next day. So it's highly possible, and it's certainly something that we should be very, very deeply concerned about, especially in New South Wales and Victoria and Queensland, where the new gold rush is tight gas, you know, all those kind of gas. And of course, you know, we continue down the runaway path of coal, so, yeah.
I'm Arthur Chesterfield-Evans. I used to be a bugger up activist, and then I was in Parliament for a while. And it was interesting, I was monstered by the AFP while I was in Parliament, which I thought was an interesting power relationship anecdote that I won't tell now. But I guess the question, as a bugger up person, we used that tactic then, and it's gone now. What should we do? Should we all become Elizabeth Salanders, or how do we encode our data? And what is at a global level, the best tactic? I mean, apart from trying to use the parliamentary system and the unions, what is the best tactical approach that you think? And what do we do at a personal level with the stuff we write online, for example?
Okay, well, I'm afraid my knees are too fucked to become Elizabeth Amanda myself. But, what's that? Oh, she's the girl with the dragon tattoo and all those crime books, yeah? Yeah, superhero. But she was also a hacker. She was also a hacker. All right, we can't all become hackers. All right, although, you know, we can't all become mechanics, but we can all learn how to change a tyre. All right? There are all little things we can do. The first thing, you know, one of the things we can do to start with is to install a Tor client on your computers. Tor. The onion router. Router, sorry. Ouch! All right, it's a software system which basically anonymises, sends your information through various other computers and all around the world before it gets to where you're going and before it brings it back, to make it virtually impossible to be tracked. You need to get some encryption software. Don't rely on Gmail, don't rely on Outlook, don't rely on Hotmail. Get, you know, places like, just look up, for example, ThoughtWorks is an agency, is a company that provides a lot of encryption software and helps activist organisations to encrypt their emails and set up their computers to make them safe. Find someone who can do it for you. Get in touch with your local activist hacker community, your local geek community, and get them to put these software on your computer. You don't need to be a software engineer. You all use Microsoft Office programs, okay? Well, or Linux equivalents. You can get people to organise crypto parties for you and your friends to show you how to install this software. Bring your laptops, your hard drives, get them to install the software on your computers. All right, because it is, at the moment, as I said earlier, it's, you know, it's not entirely necessary, but soon, with the retention of metadata, with the closing down of various flows of information, and with terrorist laws that are going to make more and more and more things illegal. I mean, I was just talking to a mate of mine earlier today about the time in 1989, some of the actions we did when we hit the French, 88, 89, when we hit the French Prime Minister in the face with a piece of yellow cake, all right? You try to do that...
Not real.
No, yellow cake, sponge cake, yeah? But you try to do something like that today...
Assault.
And terrorism. Yeah, you'd be shot. You'd be called a terrorist. Okay, but the laws are becoming stronger and stronger about the kind of theatrical things we could do as activists, as protests. All right, so you need to start, and the laws are coming stronger and stronger about the kind of shit you're going to have on your hard drive. I was in trouble at work recently because of some of the stuff that I had on my hard drive. Nothing immoral, just, you know, military stuff that perhaps shouldn't have been on my hard drive for anybody to find. The other thing about encrypting your computer, it's not just about what the agencies can take off your computer, it's about what they can put on your computer. Do you know how easy it is for me? If I could get a virtual private network on your computer, you know how easy it would be for me, and I'm not a hacker, to get in there and in nested folders create a history of child porn downloads. All right?
Scary.
It's scary stuff. All right? And then once the agencies find that on your computer, nothing you can say, nothing you can say is going to help you. You need to encrypt, not just getting stuff off your computer, but putting stuff on. Okay? That's what you can do. Become part of the herd inoculation. Okay? We need to stop, because they can get to your computer, through your computer they might get to your computer, through your computer you get to your computer, and eventually get to mine. We need to stop them at every doorway in the corridor.
Okay.
Stick something real good.
I think that was the most important thing that we said tonight, and do try and act on what Jacob has said. It was fantastic. Okay, sir.
Actually, I'd like Scott to answer it, I think. So, when you were asking about the Senate committees and the restrictions and limitations, there was a lot of talk about the internet and how you can avoid it using Wi-Fis and free Wi-Fis. Has nobody asked about payphone usage? And like, terrorists are quite smart, criminals are getting more savvy. Why can't they get a job where they can just reroute their landline to a mobile and within their work, and then it will just show up that you're calling Fisher and Paykel, for example? Like, there's just no sense to saying it's just about the data and things when I guess it's about the mobile and things as well. I mean, I can send a mobile from a payphone, for example, or a text message to someone from a payphone, but nobody's answered the question of how they're going to track that down. And it's just not wide-ranging enough. And if it's not wide-ranging enough, then why do it at all?
It's a good question. I didn't realise that there were still payphones.
Are there? Really?
Still there. So I think Jacob hit on a really important point before, because there's various, you can have various degrees of technical sophistication. If strong encryption didn't work, Snowden would never have made it out of the hotel room in Hong Kong. While I've got the mic, please go and see Citizen 4 when it opens on the 12th. I mean it. It's a really moving film.
Yeah.
A very, very human story. But if strong encryption didn't work, he would never have made it out of the hotel room. WikiLeaks would not have got him to Moscow. If these tools to anonymise traffic and to encrypt communications didn't work. So there's a really important test right there, because you had the most powerful supercomputers at the behest of these agencies with almost unlimited reach, trying to find that guy who said, I'm in Hong Kong and this is who I am, and he managed to get himself, with the help of Assange and his team, Sarah Harrison, extraordinary people, halfway around the world. So these tools work. We shouldn't need to use them, but we do. So there's a bit of a technology arms race. So the point that I was making, which has probably been taken a bit out of context on Monday, being that data retention is going to be logging the servers of IINet and Telstra and other Australian service providers, and kind of plugging that gap in the architecture that exists at the moment where stuff is just being forgotten because the companies don't need that information. So that gap is going to be plugged. But data retention isn't going to be, they're not going to be able to reach into Twitter's servers and grab that stuff. Unfortunately, the evidence is the NSA had already tried to do that, and Facebook and Microsoft and Google and so on and so on. So I guess the point being, yes, there are various ways to circumvent it depending on your technical expertise. I think Jacob's right, learn to be able to change a tyre. We're not all Edward Snowden. We don't have the full force of these agencies bearing down on us, but we don't deserve to be spied on. The first time I met Jacob Applebaum, who appears in the Citizen 4 film, he kind of stepped us through the psychology of surveillance. There's 3 stages. The first stage is, it isn't happening. There's no way it's happening. You know, go fit yourself out for a tinfoil hat. There's no way that mass surveillance on that scale is occurring. All right, we've kind of disposed of that, right? Put the tinfoil away, it's real. It's real. The second stage of the psychology is, yeah, but I'm not doing anything wrong, so they're not looking for me. And the third stage is, fuck that. You know, we have a right as human beings to live without unwarranted intrusion by the state, by powerful state actors or powerful corporations or intelligence agencies. And if the law fails and if politics fails, and I'm here to tell you that it's probably about to again, then take protective measures. Data hygiene, look after yourselves. Shouldn't have to, but we do.
Hi, my question is to Scott. He might remember me from 2 days ago of the screening of Citizen 4. Ever since last year, I've been keeping up with this whole political masquerade going on with the other government. And so my question is, to what extent are the data retention laws associated with the government's new anti-terror laws, like, you know, giving ACO a license to kill any possible terror suspects, and also the criminalisation of journalists and whistleblowers, as journalists themselves, as far as I'm concerned, tend to do a lot of researching and digging?
I think it's spot on. It's part of the same agenda and it's part of the same thought process that drives it, of accumulation of power and squashing of dissent. So, and it's happening on a really prosaic kind of level. All these referrals to the federal police, trying to find out who journalists are talking to on Manus Island and Christmas Island. You know, who are the journalists sourcing their information from about the horror that's going on inside our mandatory detention system at the moment. These powers, these surveillance tools are being used against journalists. So it is precisely that same agenda and the same people driving it.
Taxi. If I've understood Scott correctly, I think he was saying that there were 2 main drivers for these laws. The first, a something has to be done factor, and the second, more of a corporate pressure, US type pressure. I'm just wondering if you could give us I mean, this might be impossible to answer, but if there's a perspective of which one's really driving, and because it seems to me a lot about what we're talking about is citizen activism, and the something to be done can be maybe beaten or shifted, but to the extent to which it's pressure from corporates and overseas, that seems to be a slightly different sort of take.
I think Jacob actually nailed it before. This is power doing what power does. This is old. This is as old as society, as old as standing armies, as old as spycraft. Power is just accumulating and protecting itself, and human history is that balance of interplay of citizens trying to take back and disperse that power. So you know, I can guess about whether it's the TPP or whether it's about Woodside wanting, you know, more commercial advantage, or it's the NSA saying we have to collect everything. Like, these are all proximate factors. I think they all play a part. It's power accumulating and people using and wielding that power as a weapon, and that's old. And, you know, resistance to it is old as well.
And it's more extreme than it's ever been.
Joe, who's next one?
Hi, my name's Charles. My question relates on what Jacob had to say, but it's directed to Scott. You were talking about how important encryption is, and I agree. An act was passed in 2012 called the Defence Trade Control Act, which forbids researchers from communicating with external parties to Australia about extremely strong encryption and quantum encryption. Is anything being done to revoke that part of the Act? And if not, why not?
It's not. You know what happened is that we missed it on the way through. We voted against the bill, but not for that reason. I don't remember it playing any part in the debate, to be honest. We missed it, mea culpa. We missed it, and mostly it was more about the militarisation of Australian research capacity in the context of the universities being really split about whether they wanted it passed or not. There is a proposal for reforming the Act, but it does not include, to my knowledge anyway, it doesn't include those clauses that you referred to. So we're actually going to have to dig that up and try and pull it back. These are all arguments that were had and won in the 1990s about the importance of strong encryption. Without that, the banking system seizes up, diplomacy seizes up. You know, you can't kind of trust anything at all. So why intelligence and security agencies would want to be undermining that very important premise is a bit of a mystery. But if you want to look at the modern psychology of it, it's expressed probably most outrageously at the moment by David Cameron in the UK, where the push is very seriously on, which means our lot won't be that far behind. Apologies that we missed it. I don't remember it playing any part in the debate over that bill at all.
Brian Concannon. Scott, love your work. Thank God for the 1,375 mysterious missing votes that kept you in your job. We need great people like you, and thank you. And Mr. Grech, great presentation, Ellis. My question's to Samantha, being a whistleblower. I am myself, especially at the moment. This bugging inquiry that's going on, I believe it's because of the police at Redfern Police Station were going to have a vote of no confidence in their area commander, Alan Baines, back in 2004, but Internal Affairs stepped in and replaced him with the area commander from Rose Bay. This was over an assault on me and a friend by Thomas Buttle and his son Mark Buttle, two friends. I'd just like any advice from you on, today I rang quite a number of numbers, ABC, the Herald, Alan, David Shoebridge, and Mr Lynch, a few others to do with the inquiry, and they all fobbed me off. I'm too hot. It's like, it's a severe embarrassment for the government, and that's why the Ombudsman's covering it up, and he's got these advanced laws to make him above the law. Is there any advice you could give me to protect myself and get this matter out?
In case people don't know, there is a new platform operating called Media Direct, and it's encrypted. It's a double-blind anonymous submission system for whistleblowers. I would suggest that you get onto Media Direct. You can find them on Twitter. You can submit information. Then what they do, they go through an anonymising process, and then they flick it to various journalists that sit on their platform for receiving information. So that way, Media Direct and the journalists are protected, as well as the whistleblower, if you intend to go public with it. I mean, I think what's really interesting before you do that is to consider the way that we treat whistleblowers in this society, the way the mass media and the powers that be vilify people, attempt to smear, and you know, really, we saw it happen with Julian. They tried to do it with Edward Snowden. They tried to do it with the young folk that came out of Manus Island. There's always an attempt to vilify the person revealing the truth. And I actually think, like, these questions have all been really specific and interesting around how we resist and halt the coming or the already here authoritarian dystopia, but actually we're not talking a lot about what we do to proactively defend and protect and work our way through these issues that sit behind that. And the fact is that the community should be supporting whistleblowers, not buying mainstream Murdoch propaganda. Yeah.
And Pico, look, I've got a general question. We've talked about the level of surveillance that's inherent in the changes to the anti-terror laws and the retention of metadata, but there's a whole other aspect to the dangers of retention of those massive quantities of metadata by the ISPs, and that is the risk of loss, unauthorised access through simple carelessness on the part of the actual holders, the fact that it's going to be very difficult to in fact maintain that information securely, and never mind it's being valuable to the security agencies, it's very valuable data altogether. Now at the moment we have no protection in the form of privacy laws that require the ISPs or anybody else to mandatorily reveal and disclose when they've actually had a loss or an unauthorised access or any other such accident. Now it's a bit of a fig leaf, but it is something if they are required to actually disclose that as a mandatory basis in the UK. So the question is, can we actually at least address amending the privacy legislation so that we can build the mandatory disclosure of those losses and accidents and authorised access in the same way that the UK law has forced both governments and corporations to think much more carefully about the security of personal information?
Good question.
Great.
That's a really great one to finish up with, thank you. We were actually closer than we thought. So when the last Parliament broke up, right before the last election, there was actually mandatory data breach notification laws. On the notice paper, the government of the time, the last bit of the Rudd government, had decided to proceed with that. The industry was bitching a bit, but not that much. So we were actually this close. There's still a Labor private senator's bill on the table which is slowly working its way through. I don't know that we have the numbers, but it's been drafted. So I think we will win that one. Mandatory data breach notification. So the companies or the government departments, if they lose control of your private material, are compelled by law to tell you. The other piece of the puzzle, which is going to be harder to get and is actually more complicated, a bit more ambiguous, is a tort of privacy. So at the moment, not into that? All right, well, let's just go through what it was, because again, it was in conversation at one point. You can't sue at the moment. It's not, you can't actually go to the courts and sue someone for a really serious violation of privacy. And perhaps you should be able to. At the moment, you actually have no recourse. Would it end up a bit like defamation? So, you know, like interesting and useful in principle, but only able to be used by the extremely wealthy? Maybe. But it's a protection in law which does exist in other jurisdictions. It doesn't exist here. So those two things are the ones we should be looking at.
Jim's my name. I just wanted to sort of bring the conversation perhaps away from the encryption aspect of things, which is really, to me, a defensive reaction. Whereas we should be using the internet in its most positive way of trying to build a mass campaign against this legislation. So I think we should be focusing on how we're going to make contact with GetUp and all these organisations that actually use the internet to build mass sentiment around these issues. That's the big problem we have at the moment. How are we going to build that? I'll just mention one thing in relation to Jacob, to give a plug. On March 4, there's going to be a National Day of Action called by the ACTU in support of union rights, and I think we should be using the internet to get onto union members and try to get them to get the union movement itself to focus on this question, which is of extreme relevance to Australian workers. And one last plug, March 22 is the next March in March. That should be focusing on this legislation too. We should be using the internet not so much to encrypt things, but to actually spread the word as widely as possible.
Good point. Yeah.
Snowden or material released on the WikiLeaks website will just clam up and the temperature in the room drops 5 degrees and they say we do not discuss national security matters. And so they just use that as kind of a blanket shield to avoid talking about any of the material in the cables, the war logs, or the stuff released by Snowden. So short answer, no. There's no official confirmation, not even specifically going to ASD's collaboration with these other Five Eyes, the other four eyes of the Five Eyes Alliance, but much more general stuff than that. They refused to talk about it at all.